my first question for you is, what is your name and what is your profession?
My name is Deborah Gussman, and I am a professor of literature at Stockton University.
Awesome. Do you enjoy teaching literature? Were you like inspired by anything to start teaching literature?
I didn't start off thinking I was going to be a literature professor. I was a philosophy major
Oh,
as an
wow.
undergrad first, and then I didn't like logic, so I changed my major to art history, and mostly because I wanted to study abroad in Rome. Then I studied abroad in Rome, and then I
Did you
came,
really?
yeah, which was fun.
That's
It
awesome.
was
I didn't
great.
know that.
And then I came back from Rome and found out that in order to graduate, I had two languages. I had French and Italian, but I needed to have a third language that was a non-Romance language, like German or Latin or Greek, and I didn't have time to do that before I graduated. So my advisor looked at my transcript and said, well, if you take like 3 more classes, you could have an English major. So I was like, okay, I'll do that.
And that's how it works out, of course.
And then I loved it, of course. I absolutely loved it. But it wasn't like a goal or anything. I just kind of fell into it because I love to read.
Do you feel like poetry played any part in any of that? I mean, with like romantic languages and being in Rome and literature through poetry, do you feel like anything?
I loved poetry. I took a poetry writing class as a freshman.
Oh,
That was one of my favorite classes. And I wrote poetry all through college. I think I decided by the time I graduated that I wasn't a very good poet. And that
why?
I just wasn't. I wasn't a very good poet.
Okay, as a professor of literature, do you feel that poetry plays a larger part in your life than it does for other people?
I think so, yeah. Well, I don't know. It doesn't play more of a role in my life than people who are poets or love poetry.
Right.
But I think for the average person who doesn't, traffic in the world of literature a whole lot on a regular basis, then yeah, probably. I mean, I read poetry, I wouldn't say daily, but certainly weekly. There's a week of my life that goes by that I don't read
Wow.
poetry in some way. I mean, even if it's just I get a poem a day in my inbox
Yeah.
just for fun.
But do you try to like, if you come across something that you love that's a poem, do you try to, tell someone, hey, I read this, maybe you can read it or you should read it? Or you kind of just keep it as one of those things that you read to yourself?
I don't share it with a lot of people. If it's something that I think would mean something to someone in particular, I would share it. But no, not that. It's more my own thing.
Is there any like theme of poetry that you're drawn to? Like romantic poems or tragic poems or just kind of anything?
I like poetry by women. I think that is probably what I'm most drawn to is poetry that reflects women's experience and women's subjectivity in some way. I think for all literary forms,
Right.
I'm just really interested in seeing the kind of range of women's experiences, whether they're similar to mine or completely different, represented, and just sort of what's going on in women's minds. I'm interested in that. I feel like the world is not that interested in that, but like I'm there for that.
Yeah.
Can I tell you an amazing poetry story?
Good.
Okay, so yesterday I was with my friend Natasha. We're writing a book together, and we meet on usually on the weekend, and we go to this coffee shop in Audubon, New Jersey. And we were. It was like 1:00 in the afternoon. We were walking into the coffee shop, and this woman, who's like standing across the street, looks at us and says, "Are you writers?" and we said, "Yeah. Are you?" And I said, why are you asking? She said, well, there's supposed to be this meeting here in this coffee shop of like the South Jersey Writers Group or Collective, and I don't know anyone here. I just drove up from Maryland, so I was wondering if you were going to that meeting. And we were like, no, we're not going to that meeting, but that's so cool. We introduced ourselves. We were talking. We all walked in together, and then it turned out that whole group that was supposed to be there was not there. So she walked over to us. Her name was May. And we talked for a few minutes, and I said, what are you working on? She said, a book of poetry. I said, oh, are you going to publish it? And she said, would you like to hear a poem?
Oh.
And she stood there and she recited from memory this incredible poem this incredible poem. She was Japanese American and grew up in Hawaii, and her family had her uncle had been in World War II.
Okay.
And the girl had come home from school. The girl in the poem, like the persona speaker, had come home from school and had said to her uncle, "Someone in school today told me that the Holocaust was made up and nothing happened to the Jews in Germany." And this is just like the poem, and the uncle says, "Well, I know it happened because I was there." And the uncle goes on to explain what the liberation of a concentration camp was like from his perspective. The people with arms as thin as sticks, and them giving them chocolate to eat, and them being so hungry they ate all the wrappers and everything, and
Wow.
shivering, and giving them blankets. And she's reading this poem. We're standing, Natasha and I, listening to her read this poem, which she's reading with feeling. It's a full coffee house. No one else is paying any attention. I'm crying.
I was going to say, were you crying? Because that sounds really sad.
I'm crying. Natasha's eyes are teared up. My jaw just dropped.
And it just happened.
Like just happened out of the blue. And then I said, so I didn't know what to say, so I just hugged her and said, "Thank you for that poem." So
that's incredible, though.
Yeah.
I mean, for that to just happen out of nowhere, and for her to, it's a lot of pressure too to just stand and
it was beautiful.
Recite that entire poem, especially something as
that
emotional
was
as that.
That was one of the most just unique things that's ever happened to me.
That's
right?
amazing.
To just someone to come up and say, Can I tell you my poem?"
Aww.
It's a poem I've loved for a long time. It's called "To Be of Use" by Marge Piercy. So Marge Piercy is a feminist author who was probably more popular in the 80s when I was a college student. And so she kind of, I think, shaped to some degree my taste in poetry, maybe, the kinds of things I love.
Mm-hmm.
This is called "To Be of Use." Okay. The people I love the best jump into work head first, without dallying in the shadows, and swim off with sure strokes almost out of sight. They seem to become natives of that element, the black, sleek heads of seals, bouncing like half-submerged balls. I love people who harness themselves, an ox to a heavy cart, who pull like water buffalo with massive patience, who strain in the mud and the muck to move things forward, who do what has to be done again and again. I want to be with people who submerge in the task, who go into the fields to harvest and work in a row and pass the bags along, who are not parlor generals and field deserters, but move in a common rhythm when the food must come in or the fire be put out. The work of the world is common as mud. Botched, it smears the hands, crumbles to dust, but the thing worth doing well done has a shape that satisfies, clean and evident. Greek amphoras for wine or oil, Hopi vases that held corn are put in museums, but you know they were made to be used. The pitcher cries for water to carry, and a person for work that is real.
I love that. That's really great. I mean, I feel like poems like that kind of remind you of how few people that you can find that are like that.
Right.
That are like ready to just dive headfirst into something without, finding distractions or being lazy and just like finding like a real use for themselves, like finding something they can really get into and work at.
And the idea of having purpose. Right. Whatever you're doing, like whether it's something, really important and profound, or whether you're just cooking for your friends, or, taking care of, cleaning up your house or whatever it is, like the notion of just doing things purposefully and mindfully, and with a kind of commitment no matter what it is.
Yeah, I have to remind myself of that sometimes.
Right.
I feel like
it's easy because it all feels like it's too much. Right? It all
does.
feels like it's too much, and it gets blurry. But the idea that the work you're doing is useful, right? It's a value, and when people get together and do work, it's even better, right? When they pull together.
Yeah.
So I like that.
I do. I really like that. And that is
That's Marge Piercy.
Marge Piercy.
I'll send it to you.
Yeah, please do.
Okay.
I'll look into some of her other stuff.
Image, right? So cool.
I really appreciate you doing this for me. I do.
You're welcome. It's
Thank
fun.
you so much.
Yeah.